I'm not alone in my yelling at the Energy Department. Michael Needham is yelling with me. He's head of Heritage Action, which is the action arm of the Heritage Foundation. So what's action mean?
You know, the Heritage Foundation has 700,000 members, and we feel like we've won the battle of ideas. We know that energy policy doesn't make sense. The Department of Energy is picking winners and losers, as you said, at the tune of $18.6 billion per year. We decided winning the war of ideas isn't enough. We created Heritage Action. We have a website, heritageaction.com, where people can go to hold Congress accountable and stop this just out-of-control energy policy.
And lobby and fight, because Heritage would lose its tax deduction if it got involved in a political fight.
Absolutely.
All right, so you're doing that, and you got more than 30 groups to write a letter to Congress asking for 4 things, which are?
You know, the Department of Energy right now basically picks winners and losers. They spend $18.6 billion per year saying we're going to favor ethanol, as you said, we're going to favor wind and solar, which get 20 times the types of credits that other forms of energy get. And we said we should have a level playing field. Everybody should be able to compete. We shouldn't say that bureaucrats in Washington inside that building that you were yelling in front of get to choose who wins or loses. The market should choose. And so what we say is no more new credits.
And it's just a way that I like to think about that. People say, well, we need a government to set an energy policy. But the free market is an energy policy. If it's a good idea, people will invest in it.
That's exactly right. Ronald Reagan explained our country's energy policy when he summarized how government thinks. And it's, if it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. And what we do is we spend billions and billions of dollars subsidizing non-viable forms of energy at the expense of forms of energy that have been proven to work.
But you don't want to subsidize, what's proven to work is oil and coal, and they get some subsidies. I assume you want to get rid of those too.
Level playing field. Let's go into the tax code. Let's have a flat tax. Let's make sure that everybody's competing on the same exact level, and let's let the market choose what works. Let's not have some bureaucrat in Washington saying that because my ideology tells me that clean tech is what we should have, that's what we're going to subsidize.
And let's put up this chart we have of the current energy subsidies. This compares it per unit of energy produced. Coal gets subsidies, yes, natural gas and oil, they're at the top, and you can't even see the yellow part of the bar graph on them because their subsidies are so small compared to solar, which is awful. Wind is about that same level, and ethanol, the most of all. And yet the Republicans want to keep doing this.
Well, this is all about politics, and it's largely about presidential politics in Iowa. We don't need bureaucrats saying that we need new technologies. We have a venture capital industry. We have a private sector that makes these investors. Instead, you have know-it-alls in Washington who say we can make choices. It's the wrong way to go as a country. It's not a real energy policy.
So does Heritage, which people think of as a Republican group, do they give the Republicans a hard time about this, hold their feet to the fire? I see agribusiness gives more to Republicans than Democrats.
Yeah, you know, we're a nonpartisan organization. We don't think it makes sense for Republicans to be rent-seeking. We don't think it makes sense for Democrats.
And rent-seeking, explain that?
So if you look at the lobbying industry, for example, we talked about clean tech earlier.
But just to back it up, rent-seeking is a phrase economists use to say sucking up to government to get stuff.
That's exactly right. You have lobbyists in Washington who say it's easier for me as a business model to spend $1 million lobbying Congress to get them to give me a $30 million or a $1 billion handout rather than actually going and investing in a business plan. You have all sorts of lobbying going on in Washington. 10 years ago, the clean tech industry, solar, wind, those types of industries, spent $2.6 million lobbying Congress. In the last 10 years, as the Department of Energy grew, as more money was handed out through Washington, that's risen to $30 million. The number of lobbying organizations has gone from 20 to 200. We have a system right now in this country where Washington is picking winners and losers, not the market. That makes absolutely no sense.
So I didn't seem to be making any progress yelling with my bullhorn at the Energy Department. You live in Washington. Are the congressmen hearing you?
I think so. For the first time, we actually have cuts going on in Washington. It's pretty amazing what's going on in Washington, where you're actually going through and the House of Representatives is passing large cuts.
So far, by the way, ethanol subsidies have survived the Republicans' budget cut proposals.
That's exactly right. We had an opportunity last December actually to end the production credit. Unfortunately, that Congress passed it and extended it for 1 more year. We have another opportunity this year to end that credit, and hopefully the Congress won't do what they did last year. You started off the segment by talking about how out of control our ethanol policy is. It's exactly right. If you go back 2 years ago, we had a mandate that said you have to produce 12.5 billion gallons per year of ethanol. Demand that year was only 8.4 billion gallons. This doesn't make sense, and this is what happens when the bureaucrats in that building that you were yelling it from are the ones making the decisions instead of the market.
And the congressmen are making the decisions, and half of them want to run for president, and their first primary is in Iowa, and apparently to win in Iowa, you have to suck up to these ethanol producers?
That's the system we have, and that's why people have to go out and shine sunshine on what's going on in Congress and follow what their members of Congress are doing and the votes that they're taking and say, you know what, there's more of us than there are them, and we get to vote every 2 years, every 4 years for president, and we're not going to keep allowing these guys to come to Washington and put the national interest at risk.
The trouble is that the subsidy only costs you and me a few bucks, but if you're in the ethanol business, it's millions, so you fight harder.
It's political science 101. All across the federal government, we have lots of programs that are diffuse that cost us a couple pennies, you know, half a cheeseburger, but matter a lot for the companies that are seeking this, and that's why you have a lobbying industry that's grown to 33,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. The only way that we end this is if we all come together and we say we have to put the national interest ahead of the parochial interests of these people who are lobbying Congress for their advantages.
And that cheeseburger costs more because of ethanol subsidies, too.
Costs more because we're putting our corn in our cars instead of raising cows.
Thank you, Michael Needham. And